welcome back to the Recovering Out Loud podcast. I'm your host, Charles Van Laux, and today I have a series I'm starting called Ask An Addict. And I've had people send in some questions, and I'm going to answer those questions today. Now, if you have a question about addiction or recovery, um, and you'd like to have it read on the show, or you'd even like to come on the show yourself and have it turn into a discussion, email me. I'll have my email down in the description and send them over. I'll, at very least, read them out loud on the show and answer them on here. So let's get started with the first question here. So, the first question here is, why do people use drugs when they know that it could cause problems in their lives? And, I think this is a very interesting question, especially for people who haven't been through addiction themselves. I think the best way I can describe it is, your substance, cocaine, meth, whatever your substance is, it becomes your higher power. So the same way that higher power is kind of the center spoke of a person's life, everything connects back to that for them. It's kind of the same thing with the substance, right? So there are, depending on the substance, of course, right, there are some physical dependencies, like, for example, opiates and heroin and stuff like that. If you don't use them, they can physically make you sick. Like you have the flu and, all kinds of stuff like that. So there's a physical element to it. For some people, there's an escape element to it, right? Like, we don't, we have trouble asking for help with something and we don't know what to do. The problem just gets larger and larger and larger. And so to cope or, distract ourselves or escape, we can use a substance, right? Some people have a lot of untreated trauma in their life, and that trauma comes up for them in a lot of different ways. And they cope with that trauma by using drugs. Other people will have, untreated mental health issues sometimes. They can self medicate, right? So, if I'm schizophrenic, for example, and I'm hearing voices all the time, I'm going through all these very jarring things, I'm sure. Um, I might find some kind of peace through a substance. Now, we know that's very temporary, right? It's just a band aid, doesn't really help, right? Because the problem's still there. We have to actually go and get it treated, right? With a mental health professional. So, I think kind of the other layer to that question is also kind of a person's overall life. We in this industry we like to split it up into the 8 dimensions of wellness, right? And they go into all kinds of different areas of life and kind of measure and ask questions about how that area of life is going, right? So someone could have really bad financial problems, and that causes them so much stress they don't know what else to do except reach for that temporary relief, right? So we can dive in there and address that, right? We can find a debt consolidation company, right? We can figure out how to improve their credit. We can, whatever the problem is, right? But by zooming in on what that is and addressing the problem, now that's off their plate. So I think sometimes that can be a way to kind of deal with those things. But um, if you're struggling, you're kind of on the fence. Should I get into recovery? Should I not? I want to make a change in my life. I'm scared. I don't know what to do. I would say look up the 8 dimensions of wellness, right? And they have a little questionnaire online. Just fill it out, see what comes up for you, because there could be something that we don't even necessarily realize is contributing to, our consistent use, right? Our addiction. Um, so I hope that helps to explain that question pretty well. Um, Next question here says, are Xanax and Percocet bad considering they're prescribed by a doctor? Yes. Well, let me preface that actually. I think that there are many medications that have real medical needs. right? Like if somebody's in terrible pain all the time, that's not a very good quality of life. They need some kind of medication to help with that, right? If somebody is having panic attacks all the time, they can't calm themselves down, Xanax is something that helps reduce panic attacks, right? It helps reduce anxiety. So I think there is a medical use for all these things, right? But where it becomes a problem is when they are not used as directed, right? Um, some people will take more than they should. Some people will take a pill and use it in a different way than just swallowing it, right? And I think all those things can lead to addiction. They can lead to problems, even with something that's prescribed from a doctor. Um, now, as a person, this is just my opinion, but as a person in recovery, I do see medical necessity for certain drugs sometimes, right? But for myself, I avoid them as much as I can. Like, for example, I had a procedure done in the past where I went into the doctor's office and they said, "Oh yeah, it's a simple little procedure. You come in here and, right off the bat we give you a Valium and an Oxy and then we just do the procedure." And I said, "Whoa, whoa, whoa. Slow down. No, you don't. I don't take that garbage, right?" So, for me, there happened to luckily be another alternative where I was put to sleep, right? And they were able to do the procedure with me asleep, and I could just take over the counter medications after. I've also heard of people using what are they called? Pain receptor blockers. Right now, obviously, that's a pain management specialist and surgeon kind of figuring out what would be helpful for that particular procedure. But my point is that there are options. Nobody ever has to feel stuck with using a narcotic, right? Like I'll give you another example. I went and had some dental work done, and without asking me how my pain levels were, without any of that, they handed me a prescription for a low grade opiate. And I said, "Well, what is this for?" They said, "Oh, you might need this." I might need that. See, that's part of the problem with this whole addiction thing to begin with, in my opinion, overprescribing, right? And I told them, I don't think I will. I'll just take over the counter stuff and I should be fine. And realistically, I was fine. And the person actually agreed with me too. They said, "Hey, you know what? I had a similar procedure done. I didn't even take it. But even just like having a prescription of that in your house, I have a teenage son who's about to start high school. Even just having those things in your house is not a good idea, right? I'm not saying I don't trust my son by any means, right? But I'm just saying that having things available in your home, not always the greatest idea, you know, for a lot of different reasons. So for me, it has to be, I'd have to be dying pretty much to take something like that. Or if it's absolutely medically needed, I'm going to be crying all the time in pain, whatever, fine. But if I do, I think it's important to have a plan in place for that kind of stuff, right? So for me, what I would do in that situation, if I had to take some kind of opiate after a procedure or something, right? I would have my wife hold on to the prescription. I would have her administer it based on amount and time, right? You take one every 4 hours. Here you go. I would also have her check in with me in terms of how my pain is. Um, and yeah, from there, I'd be checking in with my sponsor. I'd be checking in with myself as well, with my journaling. And I'd be making sure that I, you know, am real with myself in terms of how much pain am I truly in? Do I really need this? That kind of stuff. Because that's a moment where our addict voice, that old addict behavior can come in and say, "Ooh, what can we get away with? Oh, shit, what if I take another one? Blah, 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 blah." Right? That's where we get in trouble. So having that headed off right off the bat by not even being able to hold on to the prescription ourselves, I think is a good idea. Um, Let's see. Next question here. Can you get addicted to ADHD medications? Uh, Depending on the medication, I'm not a doctor, but I will tell you that, I and other people have gotten hooked on Adderall, for example, right? I think that sometimes people will use Adderall not as directed. They will not just swallow it, stuff like that, which can all, contribute to addiction, certainly. So, I'll just speak on Adderall because that's the one I'm familiar with. But Adderall is a stimulant, right? Similar, cocaine, meth. I mean, there's all kinds of different stimulants, and I think that feeling can be addictive. And I think another way to think about what can be addictive also is what alters our state of mind, right? Because I think sometimes if we're stressed out, if we're worried, if we're whatever, just that idea that something can change the way that we feel, right? That instant gratification. I think just that idea sometimes can even be addictive, right? So sometimes it can even be a substance that's not necessarily addictive on its own, but paired with that can lead to addiction, in my opinion. Um, so let's see, I'll move on to the next one here. How can I help someone who's taking drugs to stop when they don't want to stop? Yeah, that's a good question. So there's a couple different layers to this one. The short answer is that the most lasting, strongest recovery, in my opinion, comes from the person themselves, right? Now, how does that person get to a place where they want recovery? I think there are some different motivating factors, right? Something can happen to the person themselves. They lose a job, they get arrested, they get in a car wreck. There's all kinds of different things that can bring that moment of clarity to them where they're able to see, oh wow, look, this is not what I want out of my life. I think that can lead to a desire for recovery. um, I think also having positive supports in our life and role models can lead to recovery. I think sometimes, I'll give an example. I think if a person, let's say a younger person, right, if they are living in a house with a bunch of their friends, right, all their friends use, they party all the time, it's kind of just the life in that house. It's a party house, right? In a situation like that, I think if one of those people wanted to try and get clean, I could imagine it would be difficult because all their friends continue to use. They're around it all the time. There's social pressures, there's triggers, there's, you know, all that kind of stuff. So, in a situation like that, it seems to me the most important first step would be getting out of that situation, right? And I think that that's a good spot for sober living, for example, right? Because if the main focus right then is everyone around me is doing drugs, all my friends are doing it, it's just normal. It's just the social thing to do. I'm being social, right? That kind of thing. I think if you can then remove yourself from that social element and get into a different kind of social element where there's like-minded people, everyone's working toward recovery, they're trying to better themselves, they're trying to, do all that stuff. I think then that can give that person hope. They can see an example of, oh, there is a different way to do this, right? People live differently. So I think that can be part of it. I also think that sometimes people can also benefit from using interventionists, for example. So that's somebody who will come along and, help the family members and the loved ones address the person's addiction in a loving, compassionate kind of way, but direct, kind of confronting them. And, I think sometimes that can be helpful for sure. So, I mean, there's a lot of different ways to do it. I think some people especially who are younger, they can sometimes benefit from like a scared straight sort of thing. I've heard about that working for people before. Um, I've even had one of my buddies used to bring his kid to NA meetings just to kind of hear, some stuff, right, about addiction and what it really looks like and how you want to avoid it. And you also hear some hope in there and all that kind of stuff. So I think there's a lot of different ways to do that. But the very first thing that I'll say is, if your loved one is struggling and they're hurting, right, and this is their way of coping, I want you to first try and see it as them needing help, as them, you know, reaching out for help, but not being able to directly say, I need help, right? So just showing up to them in terms of, I'm here for you. I love you, whatever state you're in, right? And I want to help you get better. I think that's a great approach. And I will also say that there's a line there too where we also don't want to enable them, right? We don't want to continue to give them money, for example, when they're in active addiction, right? There's a lot of different things there. So I think, a good resource also for you would be there are support group meetings for support people specifically. So if you have a loved one who is an alcoholic, for example, you can go to a meeting called Al Anon, and it's a room full of people who have loved ones who are struggling with alcoholism. And it can be a really great resource, not only to see how they deal with this person's addiction and how they can help and all that, but also to take care of yourself within this. Because the thing is, you as the support person, you can't control this person's addiction, right? We can't think our way out of addiction. We can't buy our way out of addiction. We can't arrest our way out of addiction. We can't beat our way out of addiction. It doesn't work that way. So we just have to show up within that realm. And I hope you use those resources. The other one, the other support group meeting for people dealing with addiction to narcotics is called NARNON, NARANON. Or no, that's Naranon. That's not right. Hold on. Narnon, NARNON. Narnon. That's it. So that can be a helpful one too. Similar kind of thing, people, helping one another along that path because, our addictions don't only hurt us, right? It affects everyone around us. So it affects the support people as well. So, it's important to take care of yourself too, because it can be consuming, supporting someone who's in active addiction and, you know, feeling like we want to, control their actions and, oh, if you would just listen to me, blah, 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 that kind of stuff. It can be really frustrating, but I think leading in those ways, using those different resources, making sure you're taking care of yourself also. Um, and yeah, also I would say, you know, if you do it, let's see, if you guys do decide that maybe a treatment center is a good option for this individual, I would also suggest trying to let them be involved in that choice, because the more that they can feel invested themselves into that choice in that direction for their life and recovery, the better. I think that, being able to learn about a program before you're just kind of thrown in it or forced into it can make it a lot better of an experience. So I would definitely suggest those things. And again, if you have any follow up questions or want some other resources or whatever, I'll put my email in the description below, and you can also just leave an anonymous comment if you like as well, below this video. Um, and yeah, let's go on to the next question here. Let's see. What is the worst addiction? It's an interesting question. I'm not really sure I would look at it in those terms necessarily. Um, I think that addiction as a whole can affect anybody of any realm of life. Every walk of life can be affected by addiction, by any substance, right? So it's not necessarily like, you know, you're addicted to heroin and I'm addicted to alcohol and alcohol is worse than heroin. I don't really think that's the way to think about it, right? Because that puts a division there that says I'm worse than you are. And then the person who is not as worse, right? I don't believe that, but they might start to think that if it's presented in that way, that could even push them away from support group meetings. They could be listening, they could be sitting in a meeting listening to somebody share about a crack addiction, and they're like, oh, I just drink a little too much. Why am I even here? And that's dangerous. That's dangerous. I think anybody who has a desire to stop any kind of action like that, right? No matter how much or how little, if it's affected your life in any way whatsoever, those rooms are welcome to you always. Absolutely. So, um, I hope that helps to kind of, clarify it. I will say that there are only two withdrawals. Like when you take a drug and then and then you stop taking it, there are only two of those that can actually kill you. One is benzodiazepines, like Xanax, for example. If you're taking Xanax and then you all of a sudden stop out of the blue, it can cause a seizure and you can die from the seizure. Same thing with alcohol, actually. So if you drink a whole bunch of alcohol for a long time and then all of a sudden you stop 100%, you can have a seizure and you can die. So that's, it's important. And I want to be clear about this. It's very, very important to always go to a medical detox for those reasons. For any substance, just go to a medical detox, right? Don't think I can detox myself because it's this substance and not that. Just go to a medical detox. It's safer. You'll be more comfortable going through it. Just do it. So, yeah, so that's kind of our first round of questions for this Ask an Addict. That's me. I'm the addict. And that's another thing I'll bring up real quick too. I've been asked that before, right? Why do you call yourself an addict? Isn't that hurtful to you? Don't you feel bad about that? And honestly, no, I don't. I draw strength from that today, you know, and continuing to refer to myself as an addict, right? I think helps me to remember where I was almost 10 years ago, and I think some people would, you know, choose other words too, right? I think I've heard other people say that they are a person in long-term recovery, right? I've heard grateful recovering addict. I've heard person who wants to stop using obsessively. I've heard person who doesn't want to relapse. I mean, essentially any mix of those can fit whomever, you know. Although I'll add in there too, though, I do think that, it's important to, you know, follow the steps sometimes too and kind of how they go about things, and that's just my opinion because it was helpful for me. And in their acceptance is right at the start there. So, part of that is, in calling myself an addict. I also, sometimes call myself a person in long term recovery as well, a recovering addict, that kind of stuff. So, for me, it's just important to, continue what's been working for me, and um, I think that if I were, you know, calling myself an addict 10 years later, and if I felt bad about it, or it made me feel negative or anything like that, I, I think then I would choose a different word, because it's not, it's about what's helpful to us, what keeps us on that path, so I think that's a very personal kind of thing to each person, and explore it, right? I mean, your recovery is customizable. Just because I recover a certain way doesn't mean that you will. You know, there are certain things that have been helpful for me in recovery, maybe not as helpful for others. So, try a bunch of different things out. Explore, see what fits your recovery and what's helpful for you in reclaiming your life. So, I look forward to other questions that come up, and yeah, if you don't want to post a question on the video, it's okay. You can just send me an email, and there's no stupid questions or anything like that. I'll check them all out, absolutely, because I think the more that we can start to form a dialogue about this, the better for everyone, you know, because there are some things about addiction that just don't make sense to people who have never been in addiction. They don't understand because they haven't been through it, they haven't experienced it. So I think learning some of that information can be helpful. And I think also opening up to our supports can be helpful as addicts and alcoholics, because, having people around us is always important, and I think the more that we can open up to them and share with them, allow them into our lives, guide their support so that everyone is helpful, everyone's on the same page, those are all good things, So, um, yeah, I look forward to the next segment, Ask an Addict Part 2. And until then, I hope you have a great day, and we'll see you on the next one.